Commander Zethrai had been watching humans for 3 standard cycles now. She stood near the tall windows of the observation deck on the Valorian diplomatic vessel, and she found herself unable to look away. From these strange creatures, they were soft. They were small. Their bones broke easily, and their skin tore like wet paper. Yet somehow, these fragile beings had managed to build ships that could cross the empty spaces between stars. Somehow they had joined the galactic community and earned a seat at the table with species that had conquered space travel millions of years before. Earth even existed. She did not understand them. None of the Valorians did. Humans laughed too loud and too often. They ate food that smelled terrible to every other species on the ship. They slept for nearly a third of every cycle, and they called this normal behavior. They formed attachments to each other that seemed to serve no logical purpose. They told jokes that made no sense to anyone but themselves. They cried at stories that were not even real. And yet there was something about them that made Zethrai keep watching day after day. The human delegation had come aboard to negotiate trade agreements between Earth and the Valorian Empire. There were 12 of them in total. Engineers and diplomats and scientists and soldiers all mixed together. They did not separate themselves by role or rank the way proper species did. A soldier would sit and laugh with a scientist over breakfast. An engineer would share meals with a diplomat and discuss things that had nothing to do with their work. They acted like a family, even though most of them had only met a few months ago when the mission began. But there was one human who caught her attention more than all the others combined. His name was Sam Carter, and he was listed in the crew manifest as a junior engineer. He was young by human standards, with brown hair that never seemed to stay in place, no matter how many times he pushed it back. His eyes always looked like they were thinking about something far away, something that existed only in his own mind. He did his job well enough during the day. He fixed things and ran diagnostics and attended the meetings he was required to attend. He smiled and nodded and said the right words at the right times. But it was what he did during his off hours that made Zethrai truly curious. Every evening when his duties were complete, Sam would go to the observation deck. He would walk past the other crew members without stopping to talk. He would find a quiet corner near the windows where the stars stretched out like scattered diamonds against the endless black of space. He would sit down on the floor with his back against the wall and his legs crossed in front of him. And then he would pull out the strangest items Zethrai had ever seen in all her years of service. He carried sheets of thin white material made from processed plant fiber. Paper, the humans called it. He also carried a small wooden stick with a dark core that left marks when pressed against the paper. A pencil. These were primitive tools. Ancient tools by any reasonable standard. The Valorians had abandoned physical writing over 40,000 years ago when they developed neural transcription technology. They recorded information directly from their minds into digital storage systems that would last forever. The idea of using a stick to make marks on crushed plants seemed almost comically backward, like using fire to cook food when you had molecular assemblers. But Sam did not seem to care how primitive his tools were. Every evening he would sit there for hours, and he would move his pencil across the paper with slow, careful strokes. His hand moved with a grace that seemed almost artistic. Sometimes he would pause and look up at the stars as if searching for the right word among the distant suns. Sometimes he would smile at something he had written, and his whole face would light up with private joy. Sometimes he would frown and scratch out a line and start again with fresh determination. He was completely absorbed in his work, and he seemed happier doing this strange activity than he ever did during his official duties. Zethrai told herself that she was observing him for security reasons. Humans were new to the galactic stage. They could not be fully trusted yet. Any unusual behavior needed to be documented and analyzed for potential threats. But deep down she knew the truth. She was simply curious. She wanted to understand what drove this young human to sit alone every night, making marks on paper when he could have been socializing with his crewmates or using the ship's entertainment systems or sleeping or doing anything else that seemed more reasonable. One evening, she decided to get closer. She moved through the observation deck with quiet steps that made no sound on the smooth metal floor. She positioned herself behind a support column where she could see his paper without being noticed. Her eyes were sharper than human eyes. She could read the markings from a distance that would have seemed impossible to Sam. She expected to see words in the blocky, angular script that humans called English. She expected to see personal notes, or perhaps poetry, or maybe technical diagrams related to his engineering work. What she saw instead made her heart stop. Both of them. At the same time, the symbols flowing from Sam's pencil were not English. They were not any human language she had ever seen in the diplomatic databases. These were curved, flowing glyphs that spiraled and connected to each other in patterns that seemed almost alive. They moved across the page like vines growing in fast motion. They looped and twisted and joined together in ways that followed rules she could not understand but somehow recognized deep in her bones. She had seen these symbols before. Only once in her entire life. In the forbidden archives of the Galactic Council, where she had served as a junior officer many years ago, she had been granted access to the deepest vaults as part of her security clearance training, and she had seen ancient artifacts covered in this exact script. Artifacts that were older than any known civilization. Artifacts that predated the first intelligent species in the galaxy by millions upon millions of years. The script was called Kelveron. It was the first script, the original language, the tongue of the architects themselves. The architects were not a myth, though many wished they were. They were the beings who had existed at the very dawn of time when the galaxy was still young and hot. They had seeded life across 1,000 worlds. They had built structures that still stood on dead planets at the edges of known space. They had created the foundations upon which all civilization was eventually built. And then 12 million years ago, they had vanished without explanation or warning. They left behind only ruins and silence and fragments of their language that no living being could read or understand. Until now, Z single quotes Rai watched Sam finish a line of text with a small flourish. He paused and looked at it with a satisfied smile. Then he turned the page and started a new paragraph as if this was the most normal thing in the world. As if he was not casually writing in a language that should have been dead for longer than most stars had existed. As if the impossible was simply part of his evening routine. Her hands were shaking as she retreated to her quarters. Her mind was racing with questions that had no answers. How could a human know this language? How could anyone know it? The greatest scholars in the galaxy had spent entire lifetimes trying to decode even a single word of Kelvoran, and they had all failed completely. Yet here was a young engineer from a primitive backwater planet writing it as easily as breathing. She sat down at her communication terminal and composed an encrypted message to the High Council. Her fingers trembled as she typed each word. She read the message 3 times before sending it because she knew that once she pressed that button, nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The message was short. It contained only 3 sentences. A human has been observed writing fluently in Kelveron script. He appears to have complete mastery of the language. Requesting immediate guidance, she pressed send and watched the message disappear into the void between stars. Then she sat in the darkness of her quarters and waited for the galaxy to respond to the impossible thing she had just witnessed. The response came faster than Zethrai had expected. Within 6 hours of her message, the Valorian diplomatic vessel was surrounded by Council warships. They appeared out of folded space like ghosts, materializing from nothing. 12 massive battle cruisers, each one capable of destroying a planet, formed a perfect sphere around the tiny vessel. Their weapons were powered and ready. Their shields hummed with enough energy to light a small sun. The human delegation was confused and frightened. They gathered in the common area and spoke in hushed voices about what was happening. Some thought it was a misunderstanding. Some thought it was an attack. None of them had any idea that a young engineer with messy hair was the reason the most powerful military force in the galaxy had just shown up at their doorstep. Sam was taken from his quarters by 4 Valorian guards in full combat armor. They did not explain what was happening. They did not answer his questions. They simply marched him through the corridors of the ship and onto a transport shuttle that carried him to the largest of the battle cruisers. He was placed in a sterile white chamber with no windows and no furniture, except for a single chair in the center of the room. The walls were smooth and seamless and seemed to glow with their own inner light. He sat in the chair and waited, because there was nothing else he could do. The tribunal arrived one by one through doors that appeared in the walls and then vanished again after they entered. There were 7 of them in total. 7 representatives of the most powerful species in the Galactic Council. Zethrai was there looking pale and nervous. The High Arbiter Noxel was there with his scaled face and cold yellow eyes. There was a Thornian with bark-like skin and leaves growing from its shoulders. There was a being made entirely of crystalline structures that chimed softly whenever it moved. There was something that looked like a cloud of golden mist hovering in a containment field. And there were 2 others that Sam could not even describe, because his human brain did not have the right categories to process what he was seeing. They formed a half circle around his chair, and they stared at him in complete silence for a very long time. Finally, the High Arbiter spoke. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "Where did you learn this language?" Sam blinked in confusion. "What language? I don't understand what's happening here. Why was I taken from the ship? What is all this about?" Noxel held up a piece of paper. It was one of the sheets Sam had been writing on. His handwriting covered both sides in neat rows of flowing script. "This language. Where did you learn to write these symbols?" Sam looked at the paper and his confusion only deepened. "You mean Latin? That's what this is about? You surrounded us with warships because I was practicing my Latin?" The chamber went completely silent. The golden mist being flickered and pulsed. The crystalline creature chimed in, what might have been alarm. Even Noxel seemed taken aback by the casual way Sam had spoken. "You call this language Latin?" the Arbiter asked slowly. "Yes. It's an old Earth language. Been around for about 3,000 years. I'm working on my doctorate in classical languages back home, so I practice whenever I have free time. I didn't think it was against any rules. Nobody told me I couldn't write in Latin." Noxel leaned forward and his yellow eyes burned with intensity. "How many of your kind know this language?" Sam shrugged. "I don't know. Millions, probably. It's taught in schools all over Earth. Lots of our scientific and legal terminology comes from Latin. Medical terms, too. Anyone who studies law or medicine or science learns at least a little bit of it. The crystalline being made a sound like breaking glass. The golden mist swirled violently in its containment field. One of the beings Sam could not describe simply turned and fled the room through a door that appeared, disappeared in the space of a heartbeat. Sam was very confused now. "Did I say something wrong? It's just Latin. It's not exactly a secret language. You can find books about it in any library on Earth." The tribunal members looked at each other with expressions that ranged from shock to terror to something that might have been awe. Zethrai stepped forward and spoke for the first time since Sam had entered the room. "I need to verify this. Bring in another human. Someone who was not involved in the initial observation." The guards left and returned a few minutes later with Lieutenant Kate Morrison. She was a tall woman with red hair and freckles and a no-nonsense attitude that had served her well in the Earth's military. She looked around the chamber with sharp eyes, taking in every detail before focusing on Sam. "What's going on, Carter? Why are we on an alien battleship surrounded by what looks like the galaxy's most terrifying book club?" Sam shook his head. "I honestly have no idea. They're upset about my Latin homework." Kate raised an eyebrow. "You're what now?" One of the guards showed her the paper with Sam's writing. She looked at it for a moment and then looked back at the tribunal with a confused expression. "Yeah, that's Latin. What about it?" "You recognize these symbols?" Noxel demanded. "Of course I do. I went to Catholic school for 12 years. They made us memorize prayers in Latin. Drove me crazy as a kid, but my grandmother insisted." She squinted at the paper. "This looks like Sam's writing. He's always scribbling in dead languages when he has nothing better to do." The High Arbiter's voice was barely a whisper now. "You teach this language to your children?" Kate shrugged. "Some of them, sure. Depends on the school. Religious schools teach it more than public ones." "Why is this such a big deal?" "Latin's been around forever. The Romans used it, then the Catholic Church kept it alive. Now scholars and scientists and lawyers use it, It's just part of our history. The crystalline being spoke for the first time. Its voice was like wind chimes in a storm. The Romans? Tell us about the Romans. Kate looked at Sam, who shrugged helplessly. She turned back to the tribunal and tried to explain. The Romans were an ancient civilization on Earth. They built a huge empire about 2,000 years ago. They spoke Latin and spread it everywhere they conquered. When their empire fell, the language survived because the church kept using it. Scholars kept studying it. It never really died, even though people stopped speaking it in everyday life. It never died, the arbiter repeated slowly. His scaled face had gone pale. His yellow eyes were wide with something that looked almost like fear. A language 12 million years old never died on your world. Sam felt his stomach drop. I'm sorry, did you say 12 million years? Latin isn't that old. It's maybe 3,000 years old at most. The Romans weren't around 12 million years ago. Nothing on Earth was around 12 million years ago. We didn't even have humans back then. The tribunal members exchanged glances filled with meaning that Sam could not interpret. Finally, Noxel spoke again, and his voice was heavy with the weight of what he was about to say. Need to bring in the keeper. Only it can explain what is happening here. Only it has the knowledge to understand how the impossible has become possible. The guards escorted Sam and Kate to a holding area while preparations were made. They sat together on a bench in a small room with no windows and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Any idea what's going on? Kate asked. Sam shook his head slowly. None. But I think my Latin homework just started an intergalactic incident. Kate laughed, but there was no humor in it. Only you, Carter. Only you could cause a diplomatic crisis with a dead language. Sam looked down at his hands. The hands that had written symbols which apparently meant something far more than he had ever imagined. I don't think Latin is as dead as we thought it was. The keeper arrived 3 days later. It came aboard a ship that was older than most civilizations, and it moved through the corridors of the battlecruiser like a ghost, made of starlight. The being had no solid form that Sam could see. It appeared as a shifting mass of golden light that pulsed and flowed like a living thing. Sometimes it seemed almost humanoid. Sometimes it spread out into patterns that hurt to look at directly. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The council had cleared the largest chamber on the ship for this meeting. Every species that held a seat on the council had sent representatives. There were beings of every shape and size imaginable. Creatures with scales and fur and feathers and skin made of metal, beings that floated and beings that crawled and beings that existed in states of matter Sam did not have words for. They filled the chamber from wall to wall, and they all fell silent when the keeper entered. Sam and Kate stood at the center of the room, surrounded by the most powerful entities in the galaxy. Sam held his papers in hands that would not stop shaking. Kate stood beside him with her jaw set and her eyes fixed straight ahead like a soldier facing an impossible enemy. The keeper drifted toward them and stopped just a few feet away. When it spoke, its voice echoed through every translator in the chamber at once. The sound was like music and thunder and whispers all combined into something that was not quite any of them. Show me the writing. Sam held out his papers with trembling hands. The keeper did not take them. Instead, a tendril of light extended from its form and touched the surface of the top page. The light spread across the paper, and the symbols Sam had written began to glow with a soft, golden radiance. The keeper was silent for a long time. Minutes passed. The entire chamber held its breath. Finally, the being pulled its light back from the papers and turned its attention to Sam himself. Another tendril of light extended and touched his forehead gently. Sam felt a warmth spread through his mind. It was not painful. It was not invasive. It felt like someone was reading a book that had been written inside him long ago. When the keeper finally spoke again, its voice was different, softer, almost reverent. The prophecy was true. After all these millions of years, the prophecy was true. High Arbiter Noxel stepped forward. His yellow eyes were fixed on the keeper with desperate intensity. What prophecy? What does this mean? How can a primitive species from a backwater world write the language of the architects? The keeper pulsed with light as it considered how to explain. The architects did not vanish. They did not die. They did not abandon the galaxy they had created. They made a choice. A choice that has only now become clear after 12 million years of waiting. The chamber erupted in whispers and gasps, but the keeper continued speaking, and its voice cut through the noise like a blade. The architects grew tired of immortality. They had existed since the birth of the universe. They had seen everything there was to see. They had learned everything there was to learn. They had reached the end of what their existence could offer them. And so they chose to begin again. They chose to become mortal. They chose to experience existence from its beginning rather than its end. Kate spoke up with the kind of bravery that came from having nothing left to lose. What does that have to do with us? The keeper turned its attention to her. They chose your world. They chose Earth. They seeded themselves into your genetic code at the dawn of your species. They gave up their power and their knowledge and their immortality so that they could be born again as something new. They became human. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the beings that did not need to breathe seemed to stop whatever process sustained them. Sam felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Like the entire universe had shifted slightly and nothing would ever fit together the same way again. Are you saying, Sam said slowly, that humans are the architects? That we're these ancient cosmic beings who decided to become mortal? Not descended from them. Not created by them. You are them, reborn. Every human who has ever lived carries fragments of their essence in your DNA. Your body is their body, transformed. Your mind is their mind, dreaming of what it once was. Kate laughed nervously. It was the only response she could manage. So when my grandmother made me memorize Latin prayers as a kid, I was basically speaking some kind of cosmic alien language. You were speaking Kelveron? The language of creation itself. The tongue that was used to shape the stars and design the fundamental laws of reality. Your Latin is a corrupted echo of that original speech. Changed by time. Simplified by evolution. But still recognizable. Still carrying the power it has always held? Sam looked down at his papers. The simple Latin exercises he had been practicing suddenly seemed like something far more significant than verb conjugations and vocabulary lists. I don't understand. If we're these powerful beings, why don't we remember any of it? Why don't we know what we are? The keeper pulsed gently. That was the point. The architects wanted to experience existence as mortals truly experience it. They wanted to forget their past so they could discover it again. They wanted to grow and struggle and learn and fail and succeed the way young species do. They wanted to earn their place in the universe rather than simply having it. But why leave the language? Kate asked. If they wanted to forget everything, why leave clues behind? Because they knew that one day you would find your way back to the stars. One day you would meet the children you left behind. The species you seeded across the galaxy while you slept and dreamed in mortal form. They wanted you to have a key that would unlock the doors they had closed. They wanted you to be able to reclaim your inheritance when you were ready. The High Arbiter stepped forward again. His scaled face was unreadable, but his voice shook slightly when he spoke. You are telling us that humans are the architects. That the beings who created all life in this galaxy are now walking among us in fragile mortal bodies. That they have been sleeping on a single planet at the edge of known space for millions of years. Yes, and their language never died. It survived on their world this entire time. Changed but not lost. Spoken but not understood. Passed down from generation to generation by teachers who had no idea what they were truly preserving. Yes, Latin, Sanskrit, ancient, Egyptian, Proto-Indo, European. All of your oldest languages contain fragments of Kelveron structure, some more than others. But the connection is there in every tongue you have ever spoken, since your species first learned to make sounds that carried meaning. Sam felt tears forming in his eyes, though he did not fully understand why. So every Latin class, every ancient language studied by scholars who thought they were just preserving dead words, every prayer spoken in churches, every legal term, every scientific name, all of it was Kelveron. All of it was the language of creation echoing down through time. Waiting for this moment? Waiting for you to find your way home? Kate put her hand on Sam's shoulder. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. So what happens now? What are we supposed to do with this information? The keeper expanded slightly, filling more of the chamber with its golden light. Now you claim your inheritance. Now you wake the sleeping technology your ancestors left behind. Now you take your place among the stars, not as newcomers, but as the oldest beings in existence. Now you remember what you have always been. The chamber was silent as the weight of those words settled over everyone present. Humans were not the youngest species in the galaxy. They were the oldest. They were the creators. They were the architects dreaming of their own past. And they had just woken up news of... The Keeper's revelations spread across human space faster than light itself. The story jumped from ship to ship and planet to planet until every human in existence knew what they truly were, or at least what they might be. Not everyone believed it at first. How could they? It seemed too big, too impossible. Too much like something from the stories humans had been telling themselves since they first gathered around fires and looked up at the stars. But then the evidence started piling up. Linguists and geneticists from every university on Earth began working together in ways they never had before. They compared ancient Earth languages to the fragments of Kelvorn preserved in the Council archives. They analyzed human DNA looking for the markers the Keeper had described. They searched through the oldest records of human civilization, looking for connections that had been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years. What they found was undeniable. Proto-Indo-European, the ancestor of most European languages, contained grammatical structures that should not have existed in any naturally evolved tongue. Sanskrit had mathematical properties built into its phonetics that suggested it had been designed rather than developed. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics contained symbol combinations that matched Kelvorn glyphs almost exactly when viewed from the right angle. The connections were everywhere once people knew what to look for. Sam became an unlikely ambassador in this new era of discovery. He and Kate were assigned to a research team that traveled across the galaxy studying architect ruins. The Council provided ships and resources and access to sites that had been sealed for millions of years. They were eager to help. Perhaps too eager. Sam could not shake the feeling that they were afraid of what humans might become now that they knew the truth. 3 months after the Keeper's revelation, Sam stood on a dead world at the edge of known space. The planet had no name. It had never been colonized or explored because there was nothing there worth taking. Just gray dust and gray rocks and a gray sky that never changed. The only feature of interest was a massive structure that rose from the center of the largest continent like a monument to something long forgotten. The structure was made of black stone that seemed to drink in the light around it. It was shaped like an arch, but the proportions were wrong in ways that made Sam's eyes hurt if he looked at it too long. The surface was covered in Kelvorn script. Thousands upon thousands of symbols carved into the stone with perfect precision. They had been waiting here for 12 million years for someone who could read them. Kate stood beside Sam as he approached the arch. Behind them, a team of human scholars and alien observers watched from a safe distance. Everyone knew that something important was about to happen. No one knew exactly what. Sam reached out and touched the cold surface of the stone. The symbols under his fingers seemed to pulse slightly as if recognizing his presence. He read the inscription slowly. His pronunciation had been refined by months of study with the Keeper itself. The ancient being had been surprisingly patient as a teacher. It seemed to take genuine joy in helping humans recover their lost heritage. The first words were simple. A greeting, a welcome to anyone who had finally found their way back to this place. The second section was more complex. It described what the arch was and what it could do. Sam read it aloud, translating as he went, so that Kate and the others could understand. This is a gateway, one of thousands scattered across the galaxy. They connect to each other through a network that exists outside of normal space. Through them, you can travel anywhere in an instant. Through them, you can access the knowledge we stored in the spaces between stars. Through them, you can wake the machines that have been sleeping since we chose to become mortal. Kate whistled softly. So it's a door. A door to what, exactly? Sam kept reading. The third section explained how to activate the gateway. It was not complicated. All it required was the right words spoken with the right intention by someone who carried the genetic markers of the architects. Someone human. He took a deep breath and spoke the activation phrase. It was Latin, or close enough to Latin that any scholar from Earth would have recognized it immediately. Per aspera ad astra. Through hardship to the stars, the gateway hummed. The black stone began to vibrate with a frequency that Sam felt in his bones rather than heard with his ears. Light flooded from the carved symbols. Golden light. The same light that made up the keeper's form. It spread across the surface of the arch until the entire structure was glowing like a second sun. Then the space between the sides of the arch changed. The gray sky vanished. In its place was a window into somewhere else. Somewhere that existed outside of normal reality. Sam could see structures floating in an endless golden void. Spheres and cubes and shapes that had no names in any language. They were beautiful and terrifying and utterly alien, even though some part of Sam recognized them as home. It worked, Kate breathed. It actually worked. Alien observers behind them were silent with shock. They had studied these structures for millions of years. They had tried everything they could think of to activate them. Nothing had ever worked. And now a human had done it with a phrase that their children learned in school. Sam turned to look at the team. We need to contact Earth. We need to bring more scholars here. More linguists. More people who know the old languages. Why? One of the alien observers asked. A Valorian with pale blue skin and wide, frightened eyes. Because this is just one gateway. There are thousands more, and there's 12 million years of knowledge waiting on the other side. We're going to need everyone we can get to explore it all. Over the next 6 months, humanity mobilized in ways it never had before. Every person who knew Latin, or Sanskrit or ancient Greek was suddenly the most valuable resource on Earth. Universities that had been cutting their classics departments for decades suddenly found themselves at the center of galactic importance. Elderly professors who had spent their careers studying dead languages were now training the next generation of gateway activators. And the gateways opened one by one. On a frozen moon orbiting a gas giant, a team led by Kate activated a gateway that connected to a massive library. Millions of texts stored in crystal matrices that would last until the heat death of the universe. All of them written in Kelvoran. All of them waiting to be translated on an asteroid deep in the void.
Ow.
Between star systems, Sam activated a gateway that led to a shipyard. Hundreds of vessels designed by the architects before they chose mortality. Ships that could cross the galaxy in moments. Ships that could do things that seemed like magic to every other species in existence on a world that orbited a dying red star. A team of scholars activated a gateway that led to a warning. A message recorded 12 million years ago by beings who knew what lurked in the darkness between galaxies. Threats that were still out there. Threats that the architects had been preparing to face before they decided to become human. The galaxy was changing. Humanity was changing. And Sam could not help but wonder if they were ready for what came next. He stood before another gateway on another dead world and he read another inscription. This one was different from the others. It was not a greeting or an instruction or a warning. It was a question. Do you remember who you were? Sam thought about it for a long time. He thought about Earth. He thought about his grandmother who had taught him Latin prayers when he was a child. He thought about all the scholars and teachers and priests who had kept the old languages alive without knowing why. He thought about the millions of years that had passed while humanity dreamed and forgot, and slowly found their way back to the stars. No, he said finally, but we're starting to. The gateway hummed and opened on to another forgotten corner of creation, and Sam stepped through to see what his ancestors had left behind. 1 year had passed since. Sam Carter sat on the observation deck of a Valorian diplomatic vessel and practiced his Latin homework. 1 year since Commander Zethrai had seen his writing and sent a message that changed the galaxy forever. 1 year since humanity learned that they were not newcomers to the stars, but the oldest beings in existence. It felt like a lifetime. It felt like no time at all. The galaxy was different now. The council still met, but the dynamics had shifted in ways that no one had predicted. Some species embraced humanity with open arms, eager to learn from the beings who had created life itself. Others were afraid. They had spent millions of years believing they were the pinnacle of evolution. Learning that they were merely the children of a species they had dismissed as primitive was difficult to accept. And then there were the threats. The warnings the architects had left behind were not exaggerations. There were things in the darkness between galaxies. Ancient things. Hungry things. Beings that had existed before the universe took its current form. Beings that wanted to unmake everything the architects had built. The architects had known this. They had been preparing to face these threats before they chose to become mortal, and now that preparation fell to their descendants, humanity was ready. Or at least they were becoming ready. The shipyards had been activated. Vessels that combined architect technology with human innovation were being built at a pace that should have been impossible. The weapons the architects had left behind were being studied and improved. Human engineers looked at designs that were 12 million years old and found ways to make them better. The architects had been wise, but they had also been tired and ready to sleep. Humanity was young and hungry and full of ideas that the ancient beings had never considered. The libraries had been opened. Scholars from every nation on Earth worked alongside alien linguists to translate the texts the architects had left behind. Every day brought new discoveries, new technologies, new insights into the nature of reality itself, and always there was more to learn. The architects had recorded everything they knew, and what they knew could fill a universe. Sam stood in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council 1 year after his writing had been discovered. He was no longer a junior engineer. He was not sure what title he held now. Ambassador, perhaps? Scholar? Voice of the ancestors? Different beings called him different things. He tried not to let any of it go to his head. Kate stood beside him as she always did. Behind them were representatives from every nation on Earth. Leaders and scientists and teachers and soldiers. Ordinary people who had been pulled into extraordinary circumstances by the accident of their birth. By the inheritance they had never known they carried. The chamber was full. Every species in the council had sent their highest representatives. The keeper floated at the back of the room, its golden light casting warm shadows across the ancient walls. Commander Zethrai was there, looking different than she had a year ago. Older, perhaps. Or maybe just wiser. She had been the one who started all of this. She deserved to see how it ended. High Arbiter Noxel called the assembly to order. His yellow eyes swept across the gathered beings and settled on Sam with an expression that might have been respect or might have been fear. Perhaps both. The human delegation will address the council. Sam stepped forward. He had prepared a speech, but standing here now, looking out at the collected species of 100 worlds, he found that the words he had written did not feel right anymore. They were too formal, too distant. They did not capture what he truly wanted to say. He set aside his prepared remarks and spoke from the heart instead. We didn't ask for this inheritance. A year ago, I was just a guy who liked studying old languages. Kate was a soldier trying to do her job. Humanity was a young species taking our first steps beyond our home planet. We didn't know what we were. We didn't know where we came from. We were just trying to find our place in a galaxy that seemed so much bigger and older than anything we could comprehend. He paused and looked at the faces around him. Alien faces. Strange faces. But also familiar faces somehow. The faces of children looking at a parent they had never met. Now we know the truth. We know that the architects who seeded life across this galaxy chose to become us. They gave up their power and their immortality so they could experience existence as mortals. They forgot everything they were so they could discover it again. And they left behind clues in our oldest languages so that when we were ready, we could find our way home. Sam held up a simple sheet of paper. It was covered in his handwriting. Latin phrases that he had been practicing on the observation deck that night 1 year ago. The writing that had started everything. This language survived on our world for thousands of years. It survived because people believed it was worth preserving. Teachers passed it to students. Parents passed it to children. Churches kept it alive in their prayers. Scholars kept it alive in their studies. Scientists kept it alive in their terminology. It survived because we refused to let it die even when we had no idea how important it was. He lowered the paper and looked out at the assembly. That's what humans do. We preserve, we remember, we endure. We hold on to things that matter even when we don't understand why they matter. Even when the whole world tells us to let go and move on. Kate stepped up beside him and took over. Her voice was strong and steady. We know about the threats. We know what's coming from the darkness between galaxies. We know that the architects were preparing to face those threats before they chose to sleep. And we know that now it's our turn to stand against whatever's out there. She looked around the chamber with eyes that had seen too much in the past year. Eyes that had grown up in a hurry. We're not asking you to follow us. We're not asking you to worship us because of who our ancestors were. We're not asking for anything except a chance to work together. The architects created all of you. That means we're family. Distant family, maybe? Strange family, certainly. But family nonetheless. Sam spoke again. We have access to technology that could change everything. Ships that can cross the galaxy in moments. Weapons that could destroy stars. Knowledge that could reshape reality itself. We could use that power to conquer. We could use it to dominate. The architects probably could have done the same thing 12 million years ago if they had wanted to. He shook his head. But that's not what they wanted. And it's not what we want either. We want to protect this galaxy. We want to face whatever's coming together. We want to honor what the architects built by making it stronger and better and more beautiful than it's ever been. The chamber was silent. Every being present was listening with absolute attention. Sam took a deep breath and spoke his final words. The old languages never died on our world. Latin and Sanskrit and all the ancient tongues kept echoing down through the generations, waiting for this moment. Waiting for us to find our way back to you? We're here now. We're ready to remember who we were, and we're ready to become something new. In the silence that followed, a single being rose from its seat. It was one of the Thornians, a being with bark-like skin and leaves growing from its ancient shoulders. It had been alive for over 1,000,000 years. It had seen empires rise and fall. It had watched species evolve and go extinct. And now it looked at these fragile humans with something like wonder in its deep wooden eyes. The Thornian bowed, a gesture of respect that had not been offered to any species in living memory. A gesture that acknowledged not just what humanity was, but what they might become. One by one, the other representatives rose and bowed as well. The crystalline beings chimed in harmony. The golden mist swirled in patterns of welcome. Even Noxel inclined his scaled head in acknowledgement of what was happening. Humanity had come home to a family they never knew they had. The children they had left behind 12 million years ago were welcoming them back. And the galaxy would never forget the day they learned that the old words had never truly fallen silent. Sam looked at Kate. She looked back at him. They had started this journey as confused captives in a sterile white chamber. Now they stood as representatives of the oldest species in existence, ready for what comes next. Kate asked quietly. Sam smiled. It was the same smile he had worn on the observation deck when he was practicing his Latin. The smile of someone doing something they loved. We preserved the language for thousands of years without knowing why. I think we can handle whatever comes next. The assembly erupted in sounds of approval and wonder and hope. And somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, something ancient and terrible felt. Humanity woke up and turned its attention toward the light. The real story was just beginning.